Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Renee Julian, and I'm the Director of STEM Libraries here at Florida State University. I just want to thank you all for taking time out of your afternoon to attend the Diverse Voices series. This is our second installment. I also wanted to thank the planning committee from the Florida State University Libraries that helped put all of this together and all of their hard work, and our speaker, Dr. Chelko. Before, I just want to let you all know that we'll have auto captioning enabled, so you can turn that on if it's already not on your settings to follow along. And the presentation will be recorded and made available once we've been able to do a little bit of cleanup and make sure it's ready to publish. So with that being said, I just wanted to thank you all for being here. And I'm now going to introduce our speaker, Dr. Stephen Chelko. Dr. Stephen Chelko was born in Decatur, Georgia. He attended Emory University, where he kept himself busy by double majoring in biology and classics, writing for the equestrian team as a Western IHSA rider, and studying abroad in Greece and Turkey, excavating historical sites. Dr. Chelko then moved on to get his PhD in physiology and pharmacology from the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Georgia, with a focus on renovascular hypertension. Upon graduation, Dr. Chelko went to Johns Hopkins University of Medicine for his postdoctoral fellowship at the Center of Inherited Heart Disease. Dr. Chelko spent 8 years as a postdoctoral fellow and an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins. Moved to Tallahassee to join FSU's College of Medicine in 2020. Dr. Chelko focuses on the study of disease mechanisms and drug efficacy in arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Chelko.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And just to clarify, that's arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, but that's okay. It took me a while to get it as well. So thank you for this opportunity. For those people that want to do STEM, I have maybe about 5-6 slides that I'll be discussing, like the actual science that occurs in my lab. But this is really an opportunity for me to speak to the LGBTQI plus community, as well as women and people of color, that my lab is an open, safe space for you to come and join my lab to do research. So while I will be talking about science, I want everyone to know that that won't be too complicated with the science aspect of it. I have no disclosures that are relevant to this presentation, and any topics that I discussed today are my own personal stories and opinions and are not reflective of any institution that I've attended or are currently attending. So like my introduction that I was given, I hail from Decatur, Georgia, where our Greek poets would call it Decatur, where it's greater. I came from a large Catholic family. I'm the youngest of 5 children. As you can see here underneath me, I hadn't known that I was gay yet, but from this stance, I would imagine anyone would have been able to pick that up. Me and my 2 sisters went to Emory University, where we both graduated, or all 3 of us graduated from Emory. My mom taught there for 27 years. I was also part of the Emory University's Western Equestrian team. After undergrad, I went to University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine, where I majored in physiology and pharmacology, where I got my PhD, and where I met the 2 loves of my life, my amazing husband, Danny Fay, and my amazing pit bull, Waters. I know, we are a Gator family, but I'm not sorry or apologetic about that at all. After grad school, I went to Johns Hopkins, where I did my postdoc fellowship at the Center for Inherited Heart Diseases from 2012 to 2016, and then I joined the faculty and ran the laboratory called Arrhythmogenic Right Ventricular Dysplasia Cardiomyopathy and Complex Arrhythmias Center of Excellence. So I love my new FSU home, but it hasn't been the easiest road to get here. I've only been here for a year, and so I'm so thankful that FSU has already profiled 2 articles online, one on the right side about a science paper that got accepted in February of this year, as well as on the left, me and some of my fellow colleagues here about the American Heart Month, a profile of the research that goes in our lab. So that said, I might as well go ahead and start where the main talk is about, which is where I've been, where I came from, and how I got to where I'm at. So my first home was Berry College. It's a private liberal arts college in North Georgia, and it's actually the world's largest campus. I swear it feels like Oxford University just dropped in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's built by Henry Ford, so you can imagine there's a lot of old school money that's got like this Gothic feel. It's beautiful. That said, I was only there for a year. I knew very quickly that this was not the right home for me. So my first semester in the fall of 2003, I was not out at all my entire year there. Before I had transferred, I was never out. So I was, my experience was secondhand of seeing people that were out and what they went through. So in the fall of 2003, an organization called LISTEN, which is an LGBTQI student organization, was initiated actually by straight students after a wake of homophobic incidents on campus. All over the sidewalk, there was sidewalk chalk just saying awful homophobic epithets. And 2 students actually had their room ransacked with spray painted homophobic epithets all over their room. The president then, Scott Colley, actually approved LISTEN in the spring of 2004, but the decision was ultimately reversed by the Board of Trustees, because I kid you not, quote, it was considered to be an advocacy group for LGBT. Duh. I mean, that's exactly what it was meant to be. But I say be cognizant of who you give your money to, not the institution, but part of the people on the Board of Trustees belong to a fast food chain that is not open on Sundays, and I'll leave it there. 10 years later, sadly, is when it finally got approved, but it was due to an incident in March 2012. A gay African-American student experienced a hate crime based on sexuality and race. His tires were slashed on his car. His room was ransacked. They poured bleach in his dresser drawers, and they left a note in his dorm room that I will not say, but you can probably gather from all the asterisks what it might have said. There was a large campus outcry, both student and faculty, and a petition was signed on change.org. And finally, nearly a decade later, LISTEN was finally approved by the president, then President Briggs, and the board. So as you can imagine, I was glad I got out of there when I did. The fact that it took 10 years later for people to finally feel safe. So I'm going to end each story of where my institution was and what I took from that institution. So what I took from Berry is fear. Within 2 months, so in my first semester in October, I applied to Emory in Atlanta. I knew within 2 months this was not the place for me. The school was founded on Christian faith and is, although they don't say that they are a Christian college, it is highly inundated with Christian students. So I felt a lot of shame and guilt. How do I reconcile my faith with who I know that I am? I was convinced that I was a sinner, undeserving of love, and that I was leading an immoral life. I was actually felt free. I knew that I was about to get out and that I was going to a school that would welcome me, that would welcome diversity. But I also felt another form of guilt, pride, but also guilt, but that I was proud that I was going somewhere where I could be my actual genuine self, yet guilty that I was leaving my LGBTQI family and queer allies at Berry, which I had not had any because I was not out myself. They had the strength to do that, but I only had fear and I knew I needed to leave. And then that said, privilege. It took 10 years later, but hearing that story of 2012, what I heard and experienced in 2004, made me realize that I have a bit of privilege, that I was a Christian at a Christian college and I was white. Had I actually been out, this is my presumption, but I would presume that I would have actually had some sort of sense of safety, unlike the young African-American kid that experienced what he experienced. So I do want to recognize in each point of these, what I've learned, I recognize my privilege, and that's something that all of us should be doing. So Emory University, after 1 year at Berry, I went to Emory, where I truly found my authentic self, my gay classics science self. And I say classics and science because I love Greek, Roman, Egyptian mythology. So Emory University is also another private liberal arts college in the heart of Atlanta. Is also home to the CDC. And I'm proud to say that in 2004, Campus Pride said that Emory tops gayest school in Georgia and the nation. Maybe 2014, it was okay to say gayest school, maybe PC now wouldn't be, maybe Emory's top LGBT friendly school, but I took pride in hearing that in 2014. And also I have a lot of pride for Emory because that fast food chain I was talking about at Berry that decided to not allow Listen, they were kicked off campus and no longer allowed to be in the duck is what we called it. It served like different food. So I love Emory. Emory is my bread and butter. My two sisters went there. My mom was there for 27 years. I don't know why I didn't go there my first year, but I hit a bumpy road my first semester. I was there less than 2 months and I made the cover of the Emory Wheel, which has been around since 1919. But it was actually because I got struck by a vehicle while walking on campus. I pointed out here at the bottom right, it's underlined. You should see the car. I actually had to contact the library archives because I was telling them about this talk. I said, I know I was on the cover, like I think in the fall of 2004. I want to talk about my long-term chronic disability as opposed to what I dealt with as a sophomore, which it was just an acute injury. And they were like, oh yeah, we'll find it. And I don't remember giving this interview, but reading it, apparently I talked about how not only after I flipped up over the car, but that I did some serious damage to the car. Like I took some sort of pride in also damaging, it was a VW Golf. But that said, some of these lessons that I learned was that within 2 months, I was unable to walk to classes. This is an acute injury. This is not something that I would be living with the rest of my life because I was able to recover. It was really hard to deal with that acute injury as well as transferring institutions because about half of my credits were transferred as T's and all of my AP credits were not counted at Emory. Maybe because they only allowed 4s and 5s, but it was really hard for me to play catch up with a physical injury. But I really made an amazing group of straight allies, amazing roommates and friends that I wanted to graduate and walk with them. And Emory did a fantastic job making every accommodation possible. They would arrive at my dorm every morning in a golf cart, take me everywhere around campus for my classes. They would bring homework, anything to my dorm room. It was great. But it kind of showed me another privilege that I have, that my temporary injury and disability made me recognize the strength and power that individuals living with chronic disabilities go through every day. That said, science is my bread and butter. I love science, and this is what I have a true passion for, but I think this is probably what every liberal arts college espouses to do is don't just come in there saying, I want to do this. Also have fun and, take a whole bunch of humanities classes and see if there's anything that sparks your interest. So not only my 3 years while I was there did I do research assistant work in another person's lab at the Owen Rollins Research Center, but I just became enthralled with Greek, Roman, and Egyptian history. I studied abroad in Greece and Turkey, excavating sites. It was really awesome. Basically, I just sat on the ground and dusted floors until we found mosaics, but it was really cool. I double majored in biology and classics, and selfishly, I kind of did that because every senior had to write a senior thesis. I didn't want to do mine in science because I knew it was going to be harder. So I did mine in classics, and I wrote it on Plato's Changing Views of Homosexuality from his Symposium, which is a book all about love, to the Republic, which is when the fall of democracy in Athens occurred and how it changed from a democracy to what they call these philosopher kings or an oligarchy. So that said, I'm just going to briefly go through this. Breaks down the symposium in its simplest form, and it's just one story of many stories. There's about 8 guys in that room that all talk about how their belief of how the origins of love came about. But Aristophanes talked about these 3 androgynes, or these spheres that have no actual anatomical or physical features that would identify them as male or female, but he called them a male-female sphere, an all-female sphere, and then an all-male sphere. But due to pretty much every origin story, due to man's hubris or their pride, Apollo actually split the spheres in half and made them almost like repellent of each other. They cast them away from each other. However, Zeus takes pity on these spheres, turns them around, stating 2 from 1, each then ever seeks their matching half. And this is, and I put loosely in quotation marks, the birth of hetero and homosexuality in Greek and Roman lore. Because I loose quotations is because homosexuality has been around for thousands of years. So don't let, people, haters say that millennials have made up trans sex identity or homosexuality. This is something brand new. No, it's been around for thousands of years, not just in Greek and Roman mythology, but numerous different faiths, religions, and cultures throughout the world. I'd also like to put a disclaimer that all of these origin stories about love and the Greek god Eros and the symposium, Plato Symposium, were discussed between a room full of men. There were no women in that room to give their opinion of what they thought love was like. So decades later, Plato reverses course. And this is a history lesson that goes from the Greek Senate to the US Supreme Court. So Plato's final text, his Republic, this is after the fall of democracy occurs and what we call the rise of these philosopher kings. These basically about 8 to 10 men that say they are the most endowed with wisdom, and so thus they should create all the rules and laws. All of a sudden, his book went south and sideways from his symposium, which he talked about also the Spartan homosexual army, that how that's, I think the quote is like, nothing better than to have a homosexual lover on battle, because you know that that person will be there with you in the event something bad happens. But now all of a sudden he's espousing these harsh views of homosexuality. He says it's a distraction and antithetical to philosophy. And then marriage is only justified for procreation. And this is ridiculous because it's been an argument that's used time and time again against marriage equality, that you must be able to procreate to actually love someone or to be married. Because regardless of homosexuality, what about 2 people that are 65? They're both, they're heterosexuals. They're probably, I would venture to say, that can't have children at 65 years old, but does that mean that they can't get married because they're 65? Or what about a woman who's barren or a male who's infertile? Can they not get married because they can't have a kid? That's just ridiculous, but it's an argument used time and time again. And I say the US Supreme Court because that's exactly what happened. In the landmark case Overfeld versus Hodges in 2016, giving finally LGBTQI plus rights to marry, one of our justices, Alito, actually refers to Plato's Republic in support of denying same-sex marriage, which is really a shame. But this is common. It's a common strategy to justify discrimination. It shows an inherent bias and bigotry. It's often due to false interpretations of scientific tests or a lack of knowledge of both cultural science and religion. In the College of Medicine, we actually have the statue Hermes. It's labeled Mercury in the College of Medicine, but that's just the Roman name for the Greek name Hermes. But this is what's considered the herald of Mount Olympus. He used this curriculum, this staff in his winged feet to basically transport, think of him like kind of like the Holy Ghost, to transport people, if you're Christian, to transport people back and forth from Mount Olympus to Hades to Earth. But he falls in love with Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and they actually have a child named Hermaphrodite. I cover up these images, but this is actually a statue in the Louvre of the god Hermaphrodite, who's considered an Eros or a Cupid, but it's a statue that shows both male and female genitalia. Now, hermaphrodites are actually not humans. They're like insects, frogs, that's something where harsh environments changes their sexual genitalia to maintain the species, but not equivalent at all. But we do have what's called transsex and intersex communities here all over the world. I am not an expert in this, so I don't espouse to be, but I do know genetics. And I say this because don't let people convince you that transsex, intersex is new. It's been around, and it's also genetics when it comes to intersex. So transsex is gender identity that does not match the sex assigned at birth, It has nothing to do with sexual orientation. Additional inclusive language is non-binary or genderqueer. But intersex is, there, I'm going to show you two examples, can be genetic. For example, there's congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It's an individual that's born with XX chromosomes. So genetically, they're female. But during development, they have reduced cortisol synthesis and elevated levels of androgen, or AKA testosterone, the male hormone. And this results in the formation of male physical traits and genitalia, although genetically, they're female. Counter to that, there's this deficiency called 5-alpha reductase deficiency. This is with an individual that is born XY chromosomes, so i.e. they're genetically male, but during development and puberty, their body doesn't produce enough what's called dihydrotestosterone, which eventually gets converted into testosterone. So this results in the body's inability to form external genitalia. As you can see down here, they still, the individual still has a prostate, still has seminal vesicles. However, the male genitalia have been inverted and creating this pseudo-vaginal wall or pouch. So not only did I learn all of that in science, but it's a mixture of the intersex, transsex science, but also a mixture of what I learned in classics, that there's no two labels. There's not male and female. That there's so much breadth in this world of how people identify. And I want to end this story on my last lesson learned at Emory, which is there are no such thing as ladies. They're just strong, powerful women. So this is a quote from the campus equestrian. So like I said, I wrote equestrian. And I found this hysterical when I was looking it up. That I don't think I noticed this when in 2004, when I actually was doing really, really well. But I found it funny that they said, well, he even managed to place third as well. So thanks. But that said, although I was the only, so the International Horse Association is co-ed. So you actually compete, males and females compete against each other. And you kind of like swimming is all individual, but you rack up points for your team. So I was the only male rider on the Emory's equestrian team, but I was always treated like one of the ladies. That's where I got into trouble. My last lesson at Emory, and for which I still have a really hard time purging from my vocabulary. And this just is indicative of, I think, culture as well. Ignorance as well, probably, but I think culture for my stance, which is that I was a Southern Christian upbringing with an amazing grandmother, but she taught me that when you want to ask, a lady to scoot by, that you say lady. But this really is a misogynistic stereotype because we're implying that they need to be subservient or polite. So in the spring of 2007, I only had to take one class. All those summer courses I took, I actually could graduate in the fall. And I was like, no, I want to graduate and walk with all of my friends. And so they said, well, you have to take one course. And I took a women's studies course because I was intrigued, but also because it met on Mondays for 3 hours. And then it gave me Tuesday through Sunday for free, just to have fun with my friends. And it was a very open forum, like round table discussion. There was no like such thing as interrupting, at the time, like we just all would just freely talk about a variety of subjects. And I remember one time just being like, oh, okay, hold on, ladies, excuse me. What do you think about? And before I could even finish my sentence, the professor said, excuse me. And I was like, oh my God, what did I say? I didn't say anything yet. Like I haven't actually said my piece yet. And she basically said, we are not ladies, we are women. And I took offense to that, which is sad that I offended someone. And I went back home and told my roommates about this. And I don't think it really like clicked until numerous years later, until I met the love of my life, Annie, who really, really helped me learn about pronouns, about intersex, transsex, about the intersectionality of that we all probably live through that we don't know about. And sadly, I still deal with this today. So I'm a faculty member for the Disability Advocacy Series. Professor Zan Nowakowski is also a faculty member, I would say the lead faculty member, but this is just an excerpt from an email correspondence that occurred 2 months ago. And I was just trying to tell her, Dr. Nowakowski, that this is just an exact quote from my email. My husband and I went to Costco this morning. My worst nightmare, I hate going to grocery stores. He's truly an amazing man who continuously works on me. He's a professor of public policy. Anyway, we're at Costco and I was trying to get around two individuals and I said, excuse me, ladies. We didn't get 2 feet down the aisle and Danny said, Stephen, they are not ladies, they are women. Also, you don't even know if they're women. Stop assuming gender. And it's true. I mean, we all go into these assumptions immediately thinking who people are, regardless of whether or not we even know them. So what I learned from Emory, acceptance. I found a family I didn't know I needed, and I went from acceptance to appreciation because I know I am unique. And I finally felt pride without guilt. I can be gay and a Christian, and I can be Christian and believe in science. Mythology. I can appreciate and be in awe of mythology without feeling guilty about reading so-called Harry Potter books or feel like I'm betraying my religion. I went to a private Christian high school, and the reason I say Harry Potter is because we actually got mail from the school that said that we should encourage our children not to read Harry Potter because they're demonic books. And it's just crazy that that's what I went into college thinking, that I could not believe in science or believe in mythology. Science. I learned that science is not confined in the classroom. It involves a lived experience, knowledge outside natural textbook, and compassion without analytics, which I'll get to later about prevalence of diseases, that people are not numbers. Privilege. Although I'm a cisgendered gay man with an open heart and mind, I still have a lot to learn, such as trans identity and systemic heteronormativity, especially pronouns, which I'm still, even as a member of the LGBT community, I'm still struggling with. And I freely admit that. And it's a privilege that I thought I didn't need to learn because since I was, a de facto part of this community, I didn't have to be ardent about proper noun use. So I went to grad school at, like I said, at University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine, where my research really took in a translational path. So I talk about this UGA's donor match policy all the time, which is amazing. It's so super cute. Basically, polycystic kidney disease is one of the #1 killers of cats. And so people would come to the vet school and ask for a new kidney for their cat. But the vet school would say, you need to go adopt a cat from the pound. We'll do the transplant, but you have to sign all this paperwork and you actually have to adopt both, the cat as well as, obviously your cat, your pet as well, which I thought was so cool. So animal research saved animals and humans. So this is how my research goes. This is typically what we call translational science occurs. In the laboratory, we create a disease model, and then we will test drugs for their efficacy. And efficacy, I mean, is strictly, can this XY drug prevent, delay, or stop or reverse disease phenotypes? Typically, that's done with small animals such as zebrafish, mice, and what we like to call in Baltimore, beamer bunnies or rats. And then that goes to preclinical testing, which is mainly about safety and toxicity. So yes, now we know the drug works, but we test to see if it's got any nasty side effects, such as in pigs and non-human primates, such as apes, marmosets. And then if we know it's efficacious, if we know it's safe, then they will do blind, double-blinded, and randomized clinical trials. So basic research matters. I'm here at the med school. I was also at a med school at Hopkins, and MDs are amazing. They help carry out our translational science to the actual bedside. But I think a lot of people don't appreciate that some of what the drugs people administer are actually discovered in the laboratory. So this is just a simple, you don't obviously need to remember any of this, but creating a disease model such as renal vascular hypertension, it's super simple. It's been around since 1932. It's called the 2-kidney 1-clit model. It's fairly simple. You just slide a little clit over the renal artery. You don't occlude it. You don't want to kill the kidney by completely cutting off blood flow, but you basically reduce the blood by about half. And so what happens is this decreased perfusion pressure causes a whole bunch of compounds to be released: renin, angiotensin 2, endothelin 1, which causes systemic vasoconstriction. And now we have a renovascular hypertensive rat that we can test a whole bunch of drugs on to see if we can fix that. During that time, I got really upset with these clips that just would fall off all the time. So I created my own clip, patented it, and it just goes to show you that you can still rework something even if it's centuries old. So like I said, in 1932, this is how they created these models of renovascular hypertension. They used then a marmoset to test the efficacy of Diavan and valsartan. Now valsartan is used all the time in clinic, especially for patients with cardiomyopathy. It's an angiotensin receptor blocker, which is very efficacious in left ventricular heart disease. So that said, I had a stellar advising committee. I authored 3 publications during my PhD. But all my co-authors and committee members were white, cisgender, straight men. So while at the time I didn't think anything was wrong, I was out, I was free, I didn't really think there was anything wrong with having all white male committee members, that this actually caused a reduction of my diversity exposure. I went from 100 to 0, going from Emory to UGA. Not that I have any, awful things to say about Emory or about UGA, except there was probably one comment I took offensively from a fellow lab member. She won't even be around in 5 years. Well, that was 2008, Tristan, and she is still killing it. So at the end of my grad school, well, technically at the beginning, within my second year, my biggest achievement in grad school was finding the love of my life, Danny Fay. He is an associate professor. He's also the PhD director at the School of Vascular School of Public Administration and Policy here at FSU. Spoiler alert, we get married in 2014. Although Maryland recognized our marriage, Florida did not at this time. Marriage equality wouldn't be passed by the Supreme Court until 2016. So what I learned from UGA: translational science. I found a true passion for translational science, testing the efficacy of drugs in animal models of heart disease. It's propelled me to where I'm at now, inherited heart diseases. Reinvent. Just because it's been done for doesn't mean you can't make it better. That renal artery clip has been around since 1932. I just couldn't stand having that clip fall off the artery. My mice or my rats were not developing hypertension. So I decided to go to, kid you not, the UGA machine shop where it was just a whole bunch of men just working on cars. And I was like, I need like this little thimble size thing made. And I'm sure they thought I was crazy. But I created a patent off of it. Publish or perish. This is a joke that we use. It's a century-old academic phrase, but it is the truth. So for any of you STEMers that are listening, this is key. If you want to go and get a PhD in science, you have to publish all the time. So just go ahead and get prepared for that. Love wins. Allow people in, and when they're in, let them bestow their wisdom onto you. My husband was and is paramount to my growth. He puts me in check, and he helped me realize that this world is much more colorful than we actually think it is. Representation, diversity matters. My advising committee was fantastic, but we need to increase LGBTQI plus women and people of color in STEM. So after grad school, I went to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine to do my postdoctoral fellowship, where the 2 biggest lessons I think I learned while I was there is disease prevalence and intersectionality. So I study a rare inherited heart disease called arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. By its name, the first part, arrhythmo, so it's an arrhythmic, an irregular heart beat disorder. Mogenic is inherited, so it's a rhythmic inherited, and then cardiomyopathy just stands basically for a weakening of the heart muscles. You hear about this on the news all the time, is sudden cardiac death in young athletes. And it was originally called arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia, or ARVD, but now we know people aren't born with this. It's not congenital. They actually develop it over time. So while it's inherited, yes, they have the genetic mutation, they're actually born with healthy hearts. It's just that the heart gets weaker and weaker over time. So I won't talk too much about the characteristics of it, but most of it is functional wise, clinical. It's ventricular arrhythmias and cardiac dysfunction. On the EKG, they have a lot of these premature beats. Basically, it means that the ventricular chambers are not coordinating with the atrial chambers. And then, as you can see here on MRI, a lot of these ventricular bulging. So in systole, when the heart is contracting, some of the walls will get thin and kind of cause like an aneurysm or bulging out, which is really bad because it will reduce the contractile or pumping apparatus. So that's the functional characteristics. Pathological characteristics. These top three images are from a healthy patient, where these bottom three are from a patient with arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. These cells that are green basically show that these cells are undergoing active apoptosis, active cell death. Active cell death causes local inflammation. So you have all these immune cells, B cells, T cells, macrophages, monocytes just coming into that site of injury. They're supposed to clean it up and leave, but they set up shop, and then it causes this fibrotic scar. And you have to think, electricity goes through metal, but if it hits wood, the current stops. This is what these blue fibrotic scars do to the heart. Electricity is going through this red, meat, and then all of a sudden it hits this fibrotic scar, and then you can go into cardiac arrest. Like I said, if it ain't red meat, it don't beat. So this is from a 28-year-old male. So anytime there'd be anyone at Hopkins that had ARVD and they were getting a transplant, I'd be like, oh my God, let me know, I'll be there. Give me that heart. I want the heart that's what they call an explanted heart, the heart that's removed before they get the donor heart. But you can see here on the left, this heart is yellow. It's like a big booger. I mean, the whole point of a heart is to have muscle to contract, to pump that blood right out of the heart. But sadly, as you can see here, what I put in this red dashed line, that's muscle. That left ventricle is muscle, and the rest is fat. This cross just shows that this patient had an ICD implanted at 18 years of age. Can you imagine? ICD is basically when you see on television, when they shock you because you're in cardiac arrest, that's something that's implanted now into them permanently. After 14 years, that red heart turned into this big booger, and at 28 years of age, this young adult had to have their heart removed and put in a donor heart. Thank God they're doing well, but it just shows how progressive and how nasty this disease is. So this is the 4 or 5 slides I said for those stimmers out there that strictly want to know about the science aspect of it. So ARVD is also considered a disease of the cardiac desmosome because it's primarily caused by 5 mutations that give rise to what we call the desmosomal complex, where PKP2 or plakophilin-2 and DH2 or desmoglein-2 are the most common mutations. So basically what the cardiac desmosome is, it's like the cell glue. Like think of one heart cell bound to another heart cell, like you've intertwined your fingers. And those, it causes basically a mechanical connection between 2 hearts or 2 heart cells. So wait, what's the desmosome again? It's this guy. So if you see, these are just a whole bunch of heart cells that are all attached to what we call here this intercalated disc, and the signal goes through what we call these gap junctions. But this desmosome looks like this little kidney bean. If they disrupt, not only is the mechanical disruption lost, but they bind the cells together. So once they start separating, these gap junctions where things like calcium, potassium, all go through, that creates the EKG, that creates the actual electrical signal to make the heart pump, is lost. And so basically the heart becomes mechanically and electrically uncoupled. So the whole point, like I said, translational science, is you create a disease model in order to test drug efficacy. So won't go into much of this, but basically my PhD or my postdoc fellowship, I spent a few years creating a mouse model of the second most common mutation, desmoglein-2. It develops a lot of the phenotypes, such as this reduced contractile apparatus, huge dilation of the left ventricle, and all these fibrotic scars that prevents this electrical signaling to go through. So working with industry is every translational scientist's dream. In 2016, after creating that mouse model, I published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation about a small molecule that I discovered that can prevent these disease phenotypes in mice. So I worked with GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceuticals to test that compound in higher animals, pigs. And they came back and like, all these pigs' hearts are doing amazing, but they all have intestinal cancer. That's the whole point of translational science, is first we test the drug if it's efficacious in smaller animals, then we go to larger animals for toxicity issues. And that happens. Only 14% of drugs that work in the lab actually make it to the clinical market. But it helped me discover a cell signaling pathway that implicated in this disease. In a paper that I published in Circulation, we also tested small molecule compound, and then Novartis reached out to us and said, hey, we got this drug that we're using for patients that have just had a recent heart attack. We'd love to test it in your mice. And like, this is like over the moon. This is like what I've always wanted to do. And then that led into my contract that I just signed a few weeks ago with Pfizer, and to test. They won't tell us what the compounds are, but they want us to test 4 blinded compounds, and then they're going to pick the best one to take to clinical trials. So that said, this is kind of just a breakdown of what we do in the lab. So we use one of these compounds that's an anti-inflammatory compound, just called a random number, Bay117082. But my mouse model develops this dysfunction in abnormal EKGs at 8 weeks of age, and they had this huge pathological progression from 8 to 16 weeks of age. So Novartis asked us to basically test these drugs before disease onset and take it all the way out to 8 weeks. And we do that sometimes via subcutaneous injections, sometimes via Heinlein injections, and also these things called Alzet mini pumps, where you can load enough drug that will slowly release every day a certain amount of drug for 4 weeks. And we just carry it out and then test the efficaciousness of the drug. As you can see, that I report in Circulation that these mutant mice treated with the drug, we were able to fix their function, and we were able to reduce their fibrotic remodeling. As you can see in mutant mice that didn't have the drug, there's a lot of left ventricular fibrosis and this diffuse right ventricular fibrotic scarring as well. So all that said, now back to intersectionality and prevalence and my story. Prevalence and funding of rare diseases. I use these quotes all the time, and I think it's really important because, well, I'll just get to the point eventually. But the scientists in 2016 said, because a rare disease afflicts, by definition, fewer than 200 people in the US, funds are often scarce for research on conditions with such a small market. The NIH Rare Disease Network said few drug companies conduct research into rare diseases since it is difficult to recover the costs of developing treatments for small, geographically dispersed populations. What's the key thing you read out of this? At least for me, small market, difficult to recover costs. It's sick, actually. It's sad and it's sick, because while a rare disease is rare, the prevalence of a disease is of no consolation to those afflicted by it. And this, knowing that there's such reduced funding to study a disease like arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy because it's rare, that doesn't mean we shouldn't. We should provide hope for these people. So all that said, as my dream is coming true, working with industry, I'm getting promoted to assistant professor right when my Circulation paper drops in October 2019. And I got promoted to assistant professor. I call my mom up. She starts crying hysterically because it's just a dream for her. I mean, a dream for me as well, but my uncle, when I was younger, needed a kidney transplant, and Hopkins is where my mom donated her kidney to my uncle. And so this was like a family achievement. And the minute the faculty headshot came about, I ran down to go from my research building to the main medical school building to go get my faculty headshot, which is here on the left. But to be honest with you, I don't remember taking this photo. This is when I learned about intersectionality at its core root. I am gay and I am living with a disability. Basically, I assume it was the flashing lights, but I don't really remember. I know that I stood up after my picture was taken and I said, I feel, and that's all I remember. Apparently, or so I was told, I don't really remember any of this because I went completely black. I fell to the ground and went into a full-blown grand mal seizure in front of hundreds of people at the hospital. Hopkins is a bustling hospital. I lost all memory of this moment. I bit the tip of my tongue off, severely dislocated my shoulder because I was going into full grand seizure. And probably the most terrifying words I've ever heard. Dr. Chelko, your husband is here and your mother is on the way from Georgia. We found a mass in your brain and we need to act aggressively. So this is that damn mass they were talking about. So this is, I can't tell you what any 90% of this MRI brain contrast results mean. I study the heart, not the brain. But apparently overall, this region spans 7.3. Now, we're American, most of us, I assume, on this call. Centimeters don't really mean a lot to me, so I can't put into perspective what the size of that tumor was. And so when I Googled it, 4 centimeters, I learned that golf balls are 4 centimeters in circumference or in diameter. And so basically, in perspective, my brain tumor is basically a little short of holding 2 golf balls in your hand. It's composed of 2 different types of brain tumors, an IDH1 glioma and an astrocytoma. This glioma is the gray part, and then the astrocytoma is the white surrounding it. Disabilities aren't always visible. So this is just an MRI showing my surgery before and after my surgery. They were able to remove around 85% of the glioma, but a lot of it's still wrapped around my optical nerve, my right eye and artery as well. So they were afraid that they were going to cut it, and they just basically told me if it grows back, we'll have to do more surgeries. But it was, I think, super successful. I'm going to have to live with this the rest of my life, but I had an amazing neuro team at Hopkins. That said, I recovered, but I'm still accepting my recovery. There are aspects that you try to come to terms with. I had a lot of PTSD right before and right after my surgery, because I thought it was fake. I didn't think what was happening was real. It just didn't. I felt strong, and then being told that you have 2 golf ball-sized tumors in your brain, it's really hard to swallow. I had a lot of resentment and anger, particularly at God. I just don't know why it's fair that I'm gay, is what I dealt with a long time. Now I revel in it. I love who I am. And now I'm just like, why would you throw another difficulty at me? And I'm still reconciling that. I'm dealing with a loss of privacy. My husband is an amazing human being, but we also have a no locked doors policy at home because I've had a seizure before in my office, and they had to call security to basically get access to me. So now I can't even lock the door when I go to the restroom, but I know that's because he truly cares so much about me. I can't drive. The state of Florida, you have to be 1 year seizure free. And I've been 1 year seizure free since May 5th, 2020, but still, this is my 2nd application for reinstatement of my driver's license. And I'm just waiting on the DMV or the medical review board at the DMV to approve it. Keppra, I had to take Keppra, which is an anti-seizure medication 2 times a day for the rest of my life. And I have a lot of anxiety when I miss a dose, or if both my Apple Watch and my Apple phone, there are gadgets all over the house that will just incessantly go off every 2 minutes. But there are sometimes when I'm out with friends having a beer and all of a sudden my Apple Watch goes off, and then I have so much anxiety that I didn't bring my Keppra with me for my evening dose. And so that is a constant anxiety I feel about my medication. MRIs, I am sick of them. I had to have one every 4 months. I had to have one every 3 months my first year, and then 4 months this year. It's every 6 months next year, and then once every year for the rest of my life. They are not enjoyable. My neuro team is amazing. It consists of a neurologist, a neurosurgeon, and a genetic counselor, and a psychiatrist. I love them to death. I need them, but they also serve as a constant reminder that this is never going away. It's weird. It's coming to terms with living with a disability, a chronic disability for the rest of your life. And I know they mean well, but them checking in all the time it's like it kind of sucks the wind out of me sometimes, but it's for my safety and for my health. So all that said, I don't want to end on a sad, terrible note, because the 8+ years I was at Hopkins was a truly amazing experience. I would call it my second home. 2 summers in a row, I worked for what's called ROP STEP, Refugee Youth Project STEM program, which is an amazing program in inner city Baltimore. There's a lot of displaced Nigerian children in Baltimore, and we provide basically a summer STEM program where we show them the craziest things, like how to, grow plants, to also how to create space stations, or our version of space stations using like paper towel rolls and stuff. The wonderful women of the ARVC program. The ARVC program at Hopkins is the largest program in the world that studies the disease that I study. And while there are male physicians on the program, it is predominated by women that are composed of physicians, genetic counselors, support staff. They were paramount to where I'm at today, and the funding that I have because of the patient-patient interaction they have, and then what I can take back to the lab with me. Baltimore Pride. I loved these events, and I loved going to them, particularly with all my straight allies. I rarely ever went to Baltimore Pride with gay friends. It was just all my straight allies were always like, "You're going this year, right?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." And they're like, "Steven, you're going, we're picking you up." And it meant so much that they wanted to support me, that they wanted to celebrate me as well, although they weren't part of the LGBTQI community. I am so proud that I got to vote in 2012. I changed my license on purpose. I'm sure that's like one of those things that some of our ex-presidents say it's voter fraud, but I purposely changed my voter registration and my driver's license to Maryland in 2012 because, damn it, I wanted to vote on 6 for marriage equality. And because of that, I was able to marry my amazing husband. We got married in the Baltimore courthouse 2 years before the landmark US Supreme Court case. So what I learned from Hopkins: rarity is beautiful, unique, and powerful, but it should never be used as an excuse to not help those in need. Prevalence is mathematical. Humans are not numbers. Just because arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy is a rare disease doesn't mean we shouldn't help these people. The disease that I have is 7% in the population, but it doesn't mean that people shouldn't be helping me either. People first before disease or disorder. So what I mean by that is a patient living with arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. The person is living with the disease, not disease first. For example, if we use an ACM patient, an arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy patient, it implies that they are a diseased person. So think of this when you're using terms like disabled or disorder. So don't say a disabled person, it's a person living with a disability. Self-advocacy. 6 months leading up to my grand mal seizure, I went on to numerous doctors saying, I'm having these out-of-body experiences. I'm having a whole bunch of palpitations. I've passed out a few times because basically what was happening is I was having petite mal seizures right before I would go into a grand mal. And a lot of doctors tried to prescribe me Prozac or Xanax. I was like, I'm not anxious. There's something seriously wrong with me. And it took a grand mal seizure for people to finally believe me. Intersectionality. We all are more than just one thing. Privilege, visibility. I had the privilege of my disability being in my head. It's not visible. I'm empowered by those people living with physical disabilities or disabilities that are physical, that you can see with the naked eye, because I have the privilege of walking around and people not, thinking there's anything wrong with me, but there is. Well, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm living with a disability. So I'm going to end this with 2 slides on science again. Organic chemistry, the bane of my existence in undergrad, but we use these things called the chemical reaction arrows. So there are what's called reversible reactions, where one arrow is bigger than the other. And what it means is basically one side of the reaction is favored. Maybe that's because there's more electrons, maybe heat transfer. But I dealt with a lot of, can I be Christian and gay? Like, I believe I can, but everyone else is telling me I can't. And then I dealt with a lot of the same thing, not just being gay, but a scientist and Christian. Can I be a scientist but Christian? I had a lot of people at Hopkins that would say, like, kind of snide comments that I can't believe you believe in that. Like, because I was a scientist, I couldn't believe in God. And then there are displacement reactions where there's an arrow, but then a side arrow because maybe an electron just got spurted off because the reaction didn't need it. As a cisgendered male, I wanted to feel like a man, but my gay self made me feel less like a man, and like I didn't know how to accept that because I thought that they were two different things, or at least that the world was telling me. But of course, I can be a gay man. Disability, which is still very new to me. I've only been living with this for about 1.5 years, and knowing that I have to live with it the rest of my life is still really hard because I do feel vulnerable a lot. And so I've had almost a loss of this fake sense of strength because I don't need to have, huge muscles and no disability to feel strong. That's a lie. But the ultimate arrow or chemical reaction arrow in organic chemistry is when finally the reaction equilibrates on both sides. And I've learned that I can be all of these things. Like our late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, speak your mind even if your voice shakes. I learned that intersectionality, that I am a gay, cisgendered Christian who is a scientist living with a chronic disability, who advocates for rare diseases, the LGBTQI+ communities, women, and POCs. All are welcome in my lab. Thank you.